White Bear Lake Police and Fire know how to draw a crowd. We'll have the highlights from this year's Public Safety Night and show you how the past was remembered.
And speaking of remembering, officials uncovered and sealed an 80-year-old mystery into evidence. We'll hear all the details of who done it.
Welcome to Lake Area Beat. I'm Tracy Menarchek.
And I'm Rick Current. We're here in Veterans Park on this beautiful day. Thankfully, it's not raining.
Yes.
We're going to talk about how veterans were honored in White Bear Lake in a little while, but first,
the show must go on. Despite the rainy night, White Bear Lake Police and Fire kept history alive for folks who came out to Market Fest on Public Safety Night. And since it was Throwback Thursday, a few faces from the past made an appearance. Take a look.
How are you? So good to see. I'm still kicking, and so are you.
Retired White Bear Lake officers Dan Williamson and Larry Flaherty reunited on a rainy Thursday night during Market Fest.
We'll play it by ear.
They were there as part of Throwback Thursday. Police and Fires look back at the department's people and pieces of history. Williamson, who spent 7 years as a DARE officer and 4 as a school resource officer, has connected with over 100 previous students on Facebook.
I've been a little bit uncertain and anxious because 25 years has passed, and these kids grew up into adults, right? And I'm not sure if I'm gonna recognize them anymore.
But he did recognize the students who came out specifically to see him, and he says his year spent with the kids were the best of his career.
It's humbling is what it is, and I just I did the best I could when I was here, and to reconnect with them and to see them having children of their own and to see them thriving in life, it warms my heart. It makes it all worthwhile, the hard times, the good times. It's beyond words.
Larry Flaherty worked in law enforcement for 40 years.
Yeah, that's a horse.
He's amazed by the upgrades in technology since the 60s, but says it's the attitudes of people that have changed the most.
The lack of respect that there is for law enforcement, and it seems like a lot of people don't realize we're fathers, we're parents, we have fears just like any other person, and we've got a job to do. Sometimes we don't like to do what we need to do, but it has to be done.
Though the rain drove people under tents and into doorways, it was still a night of connections aimed at looking to the past to make a better future.
Boy, it looked like it was rainy, and there might have been some problems.
Yes, all the effort in the Throwback Thursday, weather did not cooperate. We still set up, people did come out. There might be some technical difficulties, some audio bad. Everybody had to do what we could so things didn't get wet, camera including, but some people did show up and we did cut a car, so look forward to all that. But again, to keep the camera dry, they had a bag over it, so audio might be a little not what you're used to, but everybody's out there, we made it work.
Sorry I missed it.
It's all right.
I'm sorry it was raining too. Suicide is on the rise nationally, and there's been a 40% increase in Minnesota. First responders have felt that increase locally.
Producer Mary Klein and photographer Nick Anderson recently visited an educational resource center with chapters throughout Minnesota. Volunteers and educators at the center say there's always hope for those contemplating the unthinkable.
The most frustrating part as a dad was I didn't know how to help him.
Robert Swanson is part of a group no parent wants to belong. His son Michael, who lived with bipolar disorder, died by suicide at 33. Suicide rates are increasing in the United States, including Minnesota. According to the CDC, about half of suicide victims had a known mental health condition. Swanson says part of the problem is the misperception of mental illness.
If our son walked in right now, he'd have a big smile. You'd think nothing's wrong with him. Inside was that pain trying to even get through the day. The smile was a mask. So because of the shame and stigma, people by and large still wear a mask. So we're talking about it, but we still look at people with mental illness and go, well, what's wrong with, why don't they get fixed, you know? Take care of it, take your meds. It's not that simple.
NAMI, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is a grassroots organization with 20 chapters in Minnesota. Swanson first became familiar with NAMI when he sought support for his family.
The biggest part was we found hope in that there were other families dealing with the same thing, that we didn't feel alone, and we felt we could share our innermost fears and concerns with other people that were living with similar journeys.
Kate King is the community educator for NAMI Minnesota, which provides education, support, and advocacy, though not direct services. She says everyone should have, at the very least, a basic education on mental health, and NAMI Minnesota provides many classes, most of which are free. In her experience, she's helped older adults understand what mental illness looks like.
I had a woman come up to me and say, "Oh, now I know what my dad lived with." And my discussion was older adults and depression. So she, who looked like she perhaps was in her late 70s, was able to say, my dad was a farmer. I guess that's maybe what he lived with, was major depression.
NAMI Minnesota relies heavily on volunteers, and Robert Swanson has found helping others has helped him to a degree, though some wounds never entirely heal.
It's been 9 years. I have some people, I have the feeling, well, get over it. I mean, it's been 9 years. I'll never get over it.
For more information on NAMI Minnesota or to register to take a class, visit their website. Travelers will be hitting the road as another holiday approaches. As we go to break, Sergeant John Betty has some safety advice.
Memorial Day through Labor Day marks the 100 deadliest days on Minnesota roads. I'm Sergeant John Vetty. As we approach another holiday weekend, please take a few simple steps to be safe behind the wheel. 6 people were killed in 6 separate crashes during the Memorial Day weekend, and nearly 400 people were arrested for DWI. Let's work together to bring that number to 0. First and foremost, wear your seatbelt, and refuse to drive until every person in your car is buckled up. Slow down. Trying to save a few minutes isn't worth a crash. Don't text and drive. It's against the law and accounts for 1 in 4 crashes in Minnesota. Plan ahead and designate a driver if you're drinking, or take a taxi. Watch for motorcycles. Due to their smaller size, speed and distance are more difficult to judge. And keep in mind there will be extra enforcement during the holiday weekend. Please recognize the power you have as a driver. You have the potential to kill someone with one bad choice. Be safe and enjoy your summer.
100 Miles, 100 Stories for me is an opportunity to help bring awareness to the violence and abuse that us in the medical field experience on a daily basis. I find that most people that aren't in the medical field are unaware of the things that we experience, and I want to bring awareness to that so that we can help prevent it in the future.
I'm a registered nurse that was assaulted in the emergency department, and I got a traumatic brain injury, which ended my nursing career way too early. And I am very blessed to be a part of this 100 Miles, 100 Stories, so that we can bring awareness to the violence that happens in the nursing and healthcare field.
This hike is not going to be easy, but when people tend to suffer together, it brings them closer. And we need to make sure what happened to Julie doesn't happen to more healthcare workers in the future. So we hope you'll join us for 100 Miles, 100 Stories.
Welcome back. A time capsule buried nearly 80 years ago was recently opened and the contents revealed to the public during Market Fest.
Sarah Marku Hansen with the White Bear Lake Historical Society orchestrated the event, and she's here to tell us what's next. Sarah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me out.
So you've been very busy lately.
It's always busy in the summer, but it seems extra busy this year. Yeah.
Cool. Well, first, tell us about the time capsule. like what the event was like that night?
Well, it's one of those fluky things. The White Bear Lake Lions Club is actually working with the city to restore the base, the stone base of the time capsule along Highway 60, the stone base of the flagpole along Highway 61. And we knew there was a time capsule in it. And they said, we're going to bring it out. We want to open it. Can you create something around that? It's like, uh-oh. So the ante was a little high, but we took it out for a cakewalk night at Market Fest, our history night at Market Fest. And at the end of the cakewalk, we brought it out and did a whole demo, a whole big kind of production out of opening it, and it was just an exciting process for everybody. We got a really good interest.
I saw that they had police
Yeah.
guards. It was
Yes,
all kind
yes.
of pretty fun.
Well, not knowing what we were getting into, we decided to do a pre-open, which was really kind of cool. That was an event in itself, but being that the box we knew it was copper, and you're not going to just pry it open on site, and who knows what's going to be inside, and a lot of unknowns with the whole thing, because we really did keep it all a secret. We didn't even get to peek. And in an effort to keep it that way, we actually did the pre-open at Public Works and got it cut open, but then sealed it with police evidence tape and turned it over to Chief Swanson, because frankly, I'm not patient enough. If it had been with me,
You would open it up.
Yeah, right. And then we actually got the mayor involved to sign the evidence tape and everything else to make sure it was sealed, so that we knew Chief Swanson also is not the most patient person. She's very curious, so she didn't get to peek either. And then she brought it back to Market Fest, escorted it in that night, and it was quite the production.
And
it was fun.
what was in it?
Typically, most of the stuff was not surprising, frankly. Newspapers are usually pretty common for those sorts of things. And then from that time period, it was buried in 1940, the spring of 1940. And so from that time period, a lot of community organization rosters and membership lists and that sort of thing were pretty common to put in these things. What was interesting, so all of that was there. And the gentleman who orchestrated the whole thing was W.A. Stickley, who was the publisher of the paper at the time, the White Bear Press at the time. And he was also a veteran. And he felt very strongly about this project and making sure, so he had pushed the whole thing all the way through. So because he was the publisher of the paper in particular, there were several copies of different stories about the project itself. In addition was a really eloquent letter that he wrote explaining, it was just a single page, but it was explaining exactly why he felt this was important, how it came to be, how he pushed the project forward. And it was kind of eerie, because again, we had no idea what was inside. We had some guesses, but no true idea. And the letter was actually addressed to those who read this in the future. And it literally gave me chills as I read it out loud to the crowd.
Somebody from the future.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, 80 years later,
you're in the present, but
he's
you're
literally
actually
writing it to us.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh. So it was kind of an interesting thing. And I mean, when you think about the spring of 1940, he was talking about Hitler, and he was talking about the uncertainty of the world and all sorts of different things as part of that. And basically said, we don't know what the future will hold, what it'll be like when you open this. And I was like, wow, that's really poignant.
Yeah. What was the interest like with the community and
tremendous?
Market Fest and everything?
It was crazy. It was one of those things that we threw out there and thought, all right, we'll see where it goes, and we'll have a crowd because of Market Fest and whatever. So that was fine. But were several people deep around the circle, around the cakewalk circle there when we opened it. We actually did it on Facebook Live, and we had people watching from Europe and the Caribbean and all over the States. I mean, we had people checking in from Florida and Indiana and all different places, and so it was kind of a neat, it surprised us, frankly, and just the continuing interest in it has been kind of fun.
So what's going on now with the construction of the flagpole?
That's still going on. The cement has been poured as of now for the footings and everything, or the flagpole itself, and the cement are back in, and now they're actually restoring the stonework around the base, which is a big project. I mean, it's 80-year-old stone. Some of it has just really kind of crumbled and fallen apart, so they've been trying to replace all that. And a new flagpole is on order, and there'll be a rededication of the whole thing in November on Veterans Day, which was the flagpole itself was actually dedicated on Veterans Day in 1939. Wow. And then the base was built the following spring in 1940, so and installed in time for Memorial Day, Decoration Day. So it's been kind of an interesting process, but the plan is to have it all ready. And one of the fun things that we've got involved with actually before the time capsule piece is that when they dedicated it on Veterans Day in 1939, the point was because that was the day the armistice for World War I was signed, and so that morning when in 1919 when the armistice was signed, the church bells everybody woke up to church bells ringing because they knew there was peace in Europe from World War I. And so the goal is to have all the church bells, anybody who has a bell, basically the city, the churches, whatever, schools, anybody who's still got one, to get those ringing and kind of recreate that moment if we can.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's just kind of a neat thing. So the whole project has taken on legs that we had no idea when they started doing what we thought was a relatively simple restoration.
Yeah. Well, and our community is very big on history and keeping that up, but
For sure.
also honoring our veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And we recently, the Historical Society, worked with us, the
Yes.
Police and Fire
Yep.
Department, at Market Fest, and we came together for a rained out event.
A little bit wet, but
I
yep.
think we're talking about maybe having the stuff come out another time.
Do it
think
again
so.
for the fire
So,
prevention
yeah.
open house
Yes.
because there's a lot of good stuff, and I think
There's a lot of fun stuff.
I think people would like to see all that stuff.
This
so.
community is ridiculously supportive and interested in its history, and ridiculously in a good way. And so that just makes my job really easy because they're great stories to share and things to tell. But yeah, it was sadly wet, but some of the things could
We'll be inside
survive.
next time, so
Right,
we'll be
there we
good.
go.
Yes.
We like that.
Well, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Absolutely.
What do you get when you mix coffee, donuts, and cops? Sounds like making of a joke. I have a couple punchlines, but I'll turn it to Tracy.
It's no joke. But there was plenty of laughter during the annual Coffee and Donuts with a Cop.
So, coffee and donuts with the cops was pretty successful.
Yes, everybody's a little cautious. They come up and they're like, they look around, they reach for a donut, like someone's going to yell at them or tell them to pay or something.
And I won't mention any names. Dale, he had a couple platefuls I saw going back and forth, and they even invited us.
Yes,
So-
he's our meet and greet person. He
Yep.
goes out and gets us more people, and then all of a sudden we have a wave of people coming up that didn't know we were there. So we're lucky to have Captain Hager to go out and meet his public. His
Yes,
public.
exactly. And if there's food there, he'll be there too.
Yes,
So,
so it was a lot of fun.
coming up after the break,
Recognize this man? If you've been to any public safety event, you've probably seen him. We'll tell you who he is and why he might be taking your picture when we come back.
former White Bear Lake dispatcher Naomi Clark has a new role within the department.
She sat down with us to talk about her time in dispatch and why she's eager to shift gears.
I was startled by a lot of things, but it was a good fit just because the multitasking thing is easy for me, it's natural for me, and just the fast pace, you know, you gotta really be on. So that was easier, but there were definitely a bunch of, oh my gosh, moments in the first several months.
Like many 911 dispatchers, Naomi Clark's first few months on the job were a shock to the system.
White Bear Lake 911.
But 14 years later, she reflects on her time in dispatch as meaningful and says the biggest change has been the increase in mental health and suicide calls.
They're the most rewarding, knowing that I can hopefully be that calm voice and someone that can relate with them and, you know, get their name and just try to be there with them in that moment to help them make a different decision.
And one drawback to those calls, Naomi says, is that dispatchers, unlike police, don't see their calls to the end.
You have no closure. So as a dispatcher, we've talked at length about how the PTSD situation that officers experience, we also do, because we don't have that finished product. We don't have that, oh good, I got that person in the ambulance safely, and we just hang up the phone and hope that, you know, or what if they hang up the phone and we haven't gotten there yet, and maybe we don't locate them. You know, it's really hard on you. It's a really emotional part of the job.
Naomi meditates and talks with family and coworkers in order to decompress and make sure to have a life outside of work, which includes volunteering in ways she can see a tangible change. And though she's glad to be sticking around the department and staying close to the officers who've become like family, she's glad to hang up the phone.
After 14 years, I'm ready to take a break from hearing all the crisis and trauma that goes on in our world, you know? Yeah.
A big thank you to Naomi for all of her years of service and dispatch.
We'd like to mention a team player who's become an all-star. Officer Antonio Brown was among those honored for their service and commitment to keeping our roads safe.
Officer Brown made 55 DWI arrests this past year and has been honored twice as a DWI enforcer. Congratulations. Before we go, if you've come to a public safety event, you've probably seen the man in our next story.
He's been taking pictures of other people for decades, but now he's got a victorious moment of his own, captured in time. Producer Mary Klein and photographer Nick Anderson explain.
The joke is that I'm the unofficial official photographer.
Behind this wall of moments is a curious man often found behind a camera.
Hey, the tall guy's back. Or, you're back. You know, it's nice to see you. Or, who are you?
Mike Youngers, the unofficial photographer yet constant memory maker at White Bear Lake public safety events, began his love of photography and public service decades ago, riding along with the St. Paul Fire Department in high school.
The video camera that I used was a black and white reel-to-reel mobile recorder, which was held together by duct tape.
He's worked at 3M for 25 years running live broadcasts, among other production duties. And along the way, he discovered what people really want are pictures.
But I know since there were fluorescent lights, I just go down here to fluorescent. It gives me a color balance.
His wife Barb is often by his side. They've been together for nearly 20 years.
Yeah, this is us. It was taken in South Dakota on a trip that we had in one of those old-time photography places. And it was just a lot of fun to do.
They have a mutual passion for photography, Barb serving as his second set of eyes.
That one's okay. The look on her face, she looks a little...
And for the last 10 years, they've been capturing stories of cancer survivors at the annual Relay for Life.
With the welcome survivors in the background. So that one would be a really good one.
Only this year, the event will take on a new meaning as Mike, now a cancer survivor himself, will walk the survivor's lap hand in hand with Barb.
Now I'm a survivor and my wife's a caregiver, and it changed us both.
Mike's family has a history of prostate cancer. His dad died in 2016, and when Mike began feeling unwell last summer, he started a series of tests that ultimately confirmed their worst fears.
My first reaction was I was at work and I let out a big oh no. And I have a support person that's on this other side of the wall. She said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I think I have cancer."
He had surgery the day after Christmas, all part of his plan to be ready for photography season this spring. And after months of recovery, he's feeling good.
This is the Hope Stone. And what they say you should do is whenever you're feeling down...
And his commitment to his craft is only paralleled by his commitment to his wife. And hers to him.
We're in this together. It's not Mike fighting cancer. We're fighting cancer.
The power of pictures has changed Mike's life, helping him overcome a shyness that once held him back.
I just start to remember everything that happened at that moment.
And for one night this summer, he set aside his camera at Relay for Life and allowed someone else to capture his moment, making a lasting memory all his own.
But now I know what they're going through. I understand the struggle. Because I struggled, and I understand it. But I made it.
Best wishes to Mike and Barb, and congratulations on making the Survivor's Lap. That wraps up this edition of Lake Area Beat. I'm Rick Current.
And I'm Tracy Minarchuk. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Like catch of the day.
Thankfully, it's, oh. I ad-libbed it, you had it in there.
You say it twice. It's worth saying twice.